Sam is holding a scissors to Sheila's throat. And in holding that scissors, he's threatening her, threatening the people around him, saying that he is going to kill as many people as he can. Now, my question for you, what would you say? What would you do? I'll come back to the end of that story later. I want to start by indicating that there are ways in which you can be a hostage physically, and there are ways in which you can be a hostage psychologically. And the whole thing about how to understand is to put together leadership as the foundation to that. I'm a veteran hostage negotiator of some 40 years. I'm an author of 2 books, mostly around hostage negotiation and its application to leadership. I'm also a professor of leadership at IMD in Switzerland, and I've been held hostage 4 times myself. I'm very happy to be here today. What I'm going to teach you is what you can actually do should you be in either situation. God forbid you ever are physically taken hostage, but what you can do when you are psychologically hostage. Now, back to the story. Sam cuts the throat of Sheila. She starts bleeding, screaming, grabbing a bandage on the side of her neck. Sam steps back, and he comes towards me around the table. And with the scissors pointed directly at me, I have a nanosecond to decide. Do I talk to him? Do I call the police in? Or do I throw my body at his feet? The only solution was to keep talking. And I did, but it got worse because he put the scissors now to my throat. Never cutting my throat, but pushing very hard. I instinctively put my hands up around his arms. Looking into his eyes, I saw such rage, such hatred, and such deep grief that I tried everything and nothing worked. In desperation, I said to him, Sam, how would you like your children to remember you? He screamed, don't ever talk about my children. I'll kill them too. Bring them. I'll kill everybody I can. I have no hope. I have nothing to live for. I'm going to die. On the surface, this sounds negative. Would you agree? Yeah. But it's not. Why is it not negative? It was the first moment that Sam and I connected. And after another 20 minutes, with further dialogue around this connection, breaking and coming back, he allowed Sheila to leave the room. He gave me the scissors, which I promptly threw on the floor, and he allowed himself to be handcuffed and to walk out. Now, what happened there with understanding the transaction, how do you want your children to remember you? And his really negative response is really a basic part to understand how sometimes someone who is pushing back, is adversarial, is actually trying to make a bond. He was saying to me how deeply in pain he was, and that's what I had to hear. And to understand psychological hostage taking, you have to understand that people, well, they tie their heart up. They're in deep grief, deep revenge, deep fear. And so they can't live with full joy. And you can be a hostage to other people. You can be a hostage to a situation. But even worse, you can be a hostage to yourself. And I've been a hostage many times to myself. Now, we also need to understand what these patterns and principles are that hostage negotiators use so effectively. Hostage negotiators have to create a bond with some of the most despicable people you can imagine. Create a dialogue. Go into their motivation, which is always going to be pain and loss, and negotiate to find a way for them to give up their hostages. What do you think the success rate would be? 50%? 75%? 90%? Try 95%. That's the level of effectiveness of the art and science of hostage negotiation. And the principles start out with this idea of managing yourself, because this is a leadership process, leading yourself and then leading others. I'm reminded of the story of the little old grandmother. She wakes up in the middle of the night. There's a man standing over her bed ready to kill her. He has a club. Her granddaughter's in bed with her. She says to the man, "You must be hungry. You must be cold." He hesitates. He says to the granddaughter, "He's not going to hurt us. You can go back to sleep." She gets out of bed, locks her arm around his, and walks into the kitchen and has soup and talks with him and then says, "It's too cold out there. Let me make a bed for you behind the stove." Totally ignoring the club, she goes back to bed. The next morning, the police arrive, and they're shocked to find she's still alive, because the man who had been there was a murderer who had escaped from prison. But even more shockingly, just 2 miles before coming to her house, he brutally slaughtered 4 people, 2 parents and 2 children. You see, this grandmother managed her own emotion, her own amygdala, and was able then to manage his. And she understood people cannot kill people. And you say, "Well, George, I read every day in the paper people killing people." No, they kill objects. They kill things. There's a deep personalization that has to happen before you really can kill another human being. And many people are trained into that mindset. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is think about how you manage yourself, how you lead others. You ready to do a little exercise? I want you to look at someone around you, behind you, next to you. Put your finger up. Let me see your finger. The right finger. Make sure it's the right finger. Look at them right in the eye, somebody you don't know, and I want you to say, "You look like an inspiring leader to me." Because leadership is about inspiring. It's not about discouraging. It's about taking yourself into areas of discomfort, driving your own change, building ways of being able to develop your talents. And the second principle is around bonding and connection. Now, connection means that you are able to get into the space of another human being. That's a pretty powerful thing, proximity, the space of another human being. But it doesn't stop there. Once you are in that space, once you are connected, you have to create a bond, like I did with Sam, like the little old grandmother did with this man. And the bonding is the synergy. It's the chemistry. It's what you create that allows the emotion to flow. And you do not have to like someone to bond to them. Let me repeat. You do not have to like someone to bond with them. Hostage negotiators don't start out liking the person they're negotiating with normally. But through a common goal, you're able to build that bond. But it doesn't stop there. What happens is the bonding, which we all love and which, well, some people love, some people don't like bonding. Separation is always going to come. A break in the bond, a loss, a frustration, death, disappointments, you name the possibilities of what breaks the bond. And that is the most powerful motivator in human beings there is. It's 80% people are driven by their loss, fears of loss, or anticipated loss. And the sadness, the break in that bond, opens the grieving process. And grieving is essential to get over something, to come back to the joy of life. You are a hostage if you don't go through grief, if you can't get over something. And the stages of grief are extensive, including ultimately forgiving and discovering again gratitude. And I'll come back and revisit that. Now, let me go on to the next point, which is around trust. Trust is essential to what actually has to happen. And without trust, you don't go very far. Trust is based on a secure base. When you are able to create a certain safety with someone, create a certain protection, then it shuts down the brain. You all know the brain is fundamentally negative. But if you live that way, you're going to die prematurely because it makes you sick. And you're going to make others miserable while you're waiting to die. So what you have to do is rewire your brain to be able to get over the pain's fundamental drive to avoid pain. Its fundamental goal is survival. But you can't live that way. And I'm reminded of Frank. He was 90 when I first met him, naturally resilient. And as I got to know him, I always asked him, Frank, what's the secret to living so long? And he came up with all kind of little clever answers. And about 2 years after I met him, he said, George, I think I have the answer. The party is not over yet. Now, Frank would still shed tears over people he lost in the First World War, the Second World War. He lost his mother when he was 10. He lost his wife after 54 years of marriage, which is very risky for premature death. But he always got over it. He left bygones be bygones. And he went through that grief and came back to the joy. He was not a psychological hostage. And his goal was to live to be 100, which meant he got a letter like this from the Queen of England. And he was proud to have such a letter. And he made it. But not only did he make it to he was 100 years old, he made it into 3 centuries. So he got a second letter. And Frank died at 105. And I saw him 2 months before he died, blind in a military hospital. And he said to me, tell everybody, I know you meet a lot of people, tell everybody they have to enjoy the party till it's over. Now, secure base, what is this? A secure base, well, it's a person, a place, an object, a thing, a symbol, which allows you to feel protected, to feel inspired, to be able to change and seek change and be able to do things that you wouldn't ordinarily do. If you are filled with fear, you contract. With secure bases, and they range broadly, you have to be able then to build the trust, to shut down that mechanism in the brain, to see the opportunities, to fail, take risks, have pain, like a marathon runner. They have to be able to endure pain for the benefit of the outcome. If you cannot train your brain to enjoy pain at the right moment, delayed gratification, you will never truly be successful. Shortly after I met Frank, I had a son. I had 2 sons at that point, Doug and Paul. Doug was in medical school. At 23, he was in a motorcycle accident. He lived for 5 days and died. The deepest grief in my life. I could have easily been a hostage, and I was for a time, believing I could never get over this. I couldn't go forward. And Paul deserved a father who was filled with joy again. So I had to go through the grief to come out of it to be a good father. And when I saw Frank, a short time after that, he came across the room with his arms outstretched, tears in his eyes. And he said, I understand, George. And he took me into his arms. And I started crying. He started crying. And he said, I never told you, I also lost a son. And he inspired me by saying, you will always miss your son, but you don't have to always feel grief. You can come back to the joy of life. The party is not over yet. This was Doug, and I have since said goodbye to him many times, but I have come over it and not allowed myself to be a hostage. 3 years later, I had another son, Andrew. And Andrew deserved a joyful father. not a father who was a hostage, not a father who was grieving, not a father who was a victim. I wanted to come out of this with the attitude of life is filled for joy. And I learned something very important from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a friend and a colleague and a teacher of mine. Do what you do to honor the people who die or pass away before you. So part of my honoring Doug is being here today. And I do many things in my life to honor him. I was recently flying to the islands in the Faroe Islands, and sitting on that plane was a woman in her 80s. And we hit turbulence that was strong, and she started crying and screaming. She had an anxiety attack, hitting her head against the wall of the plane and pulling her hair. She was really losing it. And now here's the second thing, or the fourth thing that hostage negotiators do. They talk, they dialogue, they listen to get inside. And so I reached out and took her hand and didn't know her name. I just said, we're going to be okay. And she squeezed my hand, still screaming. She squeezed harder, and I said, hold on. And then I said, the plane is going to hold us up. And she said, we're going to die. And I said, no, we're not going to die. I know this plane can hold us. And she said, how do you know that? Now, see, that was another one of those turning points. She allowed me to be a secure base. And within a short time, we agreed that we were going to have fun. And we actually took arms, and we were dancing with the turbulence. And she became very, very calm and actually put her head on my shoulder. Talking, dialogue, and being able to listen becomes very, very important. And some people don't talk well. They talk too much. They don't answer questions. They do all kinds of things but have a dialogue. And we teach at IMD the principle that you say what you have to say in one word, or one sentence, or 4 sentences at the maximum. And if you need more, then ask if you can say more. And ask questions with 15 words or less. Now, in business organizations, that is very uncommon. Now, let me just walk through the other points. Put the fish on the table. This is an expression that says you have to learn to like dealing with conflict. If you're not going to be a hostage, you have to be able to deal with conflicts, differences. And putting the fish on the table means if there is that difference, put it on the table, go through the bloody, smelly mess of cleaning it, because if all the conflicts were under the table and they were fish, they would start smelling, huh? And there's a lot of smelly fish around. Your job is to get that fish on the table and clean it for the great fish dinner at the end of the day. Lastly, having a leadership mindset. To be able to, as Adriana did here, and she was actually on TED in the Boston bombing, losing part of her leg. And what happened is she said, I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to be a survivor. She's learning how to dance again to be able to go on with Dancing with the Stars. Or like Nelson Mandela, who lived for 27 years in prison, coming out speaking reconciliation and forgiveness. Could he have been a hostage? Yeah. Could he have been resentful? Yes. Could he have been bitter? But he was not. He said, let bygones be bygones. We're going to look to the future. And he got over that. That's really fundamental. So, look at your partner. Again, put that finger out very quickly and remind them that they can do anything they want to do. I have some questions for you. And here's the point. Leadership is about leading yourself. Would you agree? Yes. If you can't lead yourself, why in the heck would anybody follow you? Maybe out of fear, maybe out of need, maybe all other kinds of things, but not because you are a secure base. And I wrote the book, Care to Dare, to create that whole idea of how you become a secure base as a leader, 100% caring, but being tough. Being able to deliver pain to people, and being able to say what is the truth. Because part of conflict management, in addition to putting the fish on the table, is telling the truth. Would you rather be told a lie with a kiss or slapped in the face with the truth? High performers want to know the truth. So here's the questions. Are you a hostage to someone or something or to yourself? And how do you lead yourself? Secondly, how do you connect? How do you bond? And when necessary, let go. What losses have you never gotten over? Do you have secure bases that inspire you? They give you a feeling of protection. And are you a secure base to someone, like I was to the lady on the plane? How are you at talking and dialogue? Do you answer questions? Are you able to ask questions? Do you show interest and curiosity in other people? Many times, dialogue can only begin after a question. You have to be curious about the other person. If you're more interested in being interesting, you're going to be boring. But you have to be interested in the others. And lastly, how are you at dealing with conflict, putting those fish on the table, and do you have the mindset full of joy no matter what has happened in your life story? Now, the idea worth passing on, the TED philosophy. What's the idea that's worth passing on? It's about never being a hostage to anyone, anything, anywhere, at any time, even to yourself. And coming back to the full joy of life. And ultimately, in living with that full joy, you're going to challenge yourself. You're going to go through pains. Life itself is a risk. If you're afraid to take risks, you're not going to live life in a full, inspiring way. And you have to be able, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, do not go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. Thank you for listening, and God bless you. Thank you.